probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch, but.
What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here, another edition of Summer School. That's my college ball preview series on the Cover 3 podcast. And today, Kentucky. I'm going to head to Cat's Paws. I'm going to call on my man, Aaron Gershon. What's going on, dude?
What's up, man? It's good to be back.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Speaking of back, a whole lot of starters back on this football team for Kentucky, especially on the defensive side. Always start with coaching changes if there are any. What do you expect to see different out of this team coaching related this year?
Well, it starts on the offense side of the ball there. You have one coming back and then two new ones. It starts with offense coordinator Bush Hamdan, who Liam Cohen, another one-and-done stay in Lexington, going back to the NFL to serve as the offense coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And they bring in Bush Hamdan, who I think it's an exciting hire. I think it's really tough when you have to make that hire in February. You know, a lot of the coaching carousels already, quieted down and not many people are looking to change spots. But to get a guy in Bush Hamdan, who every year he's been an offensive coordinator between Washington, last year at Boise State, and then he, I'll bring up what he did in Missouri in a second. But every year he's been an offensive coordinator at those two places. He's had an 1,000-yard rusher. So, Kentucky's a program that loves to run the football, and they're going to get creative, I think, with the run game again. I think you're going to see them run the quarterback more, and they have a guy who is capable of doing that in Brock Vandergriff. That he did that a ton at Boise State. I think they had the sixth best rushing offense in the country last year, finished 25th in total offense. And, they're not a tempo offense like Tennessee and Ole Miss, but there's definitely more no huddle that I think Kentucky fans have been craving. They've had one of the slowest offenses the last two seasons with both Cone and then Rich Scangarello. So I think that's an exciting hire. Then at receiver, bring in Dakel Shorts from Houston, a guy who played pretty recently at West Virginia. I think he's top 5 in their program history in receiving yards. I think Kentucky just wanted to get a receivers coach that's kind of played the position and can kind of demonstrate some things to players that maybe the former guy Scott Woodward couldn't do as he was a quarterback during his playing days. So that hire, and then Eric Wolford, who is a pretty big name across college football, left Kentucky 2 years ago to join Alabama as their offensive line coach, stayed there for 2 years. I know his unit was obviously up and down last year, had some youth on it, and I think Alabama fans were okay with seeing him go. But the year he was here in Lexington in 2021, Kentucky had one of its best offensive lines in the Stoops era, and he did a really good job on the recruiting trail. He was a guy who was either the primary or secondary for both Deion Walker and Barryon Brown, who are obviously two of Kentucky's best players. So a guy they feel really confident with to get the offensive line to take another step. They were a little bit better last year, not great. Hope to take another step this year, and then a guy who can kind of bring some juice back on the recruiting trail at that position.
You mentioned Vandergriff, that they go get him very little game experience at Georgia. Was a high-profile guy, a guy who was a target for Georgia, was a target for Lincoln Riley back in the day. And, a guy, I guess, who probably wants to go somewhere and start. What does Kentucky think they have in him?
Yeah, I think this is more similar. People have asked me, like, oh, is this Devin Leary again? Well, I think this is kind of similar to not the status, because like you said, Brock Vandergriff was a 4 or 5 star guy who was only ranked behind Caleb Williams and Drake May and a couple others in that class. I think they compare it more to when they got Will Levis, right? Where it's a guy who has very limited experience, but has a really high ceiling, where Devin Leary was more of a known commodity. And then they kind of took a little bit of a risk in hindsight because he had never played in that pro style system. He'd played in such an up tempo offense at NC State, and he didn't quite translate here in the pro style offense, or at least couldn't, find a great rhythm. I think they think Vandergriff is more of a raw talent and a guy that has obviously been around a winning program, has been around, Seston Bennett, who is a great college quarterback. Obviously, Carson Beck, who for my money, I think is the best quarterback coming into this year in college football. So, guy who's been around some really good quarterbacks, and obviously probably the best culture in college football in Georgia. So they think they have a guy who just knows what it takes to win, and a guy, obviously, who was a high-end prospect that has stuff in his game. And he's a guy too, I think, that can, what we saw a lot during the spring is he can run the ball. He's going to be, I think, more than just a thrower. I think he's going to be a guy who they have some quarterback design runs like they did with Will Levis in his first year in 2021, a guy that if the pocket collapses can go make a play with his legs. And I think that's been lacking. It's an important part of college football that Kentucky in 2022, they kind of took the wheels off Will Levis trying to preserve his health. And I understand that, but it really hurt the offense when his legs were such a crucial part of their 21 offense. And then last year they had a guy who just wasn't capable of doing that with Devin Leary. So there's definitely a lot of excitement for Brock Vandergriff, but like you mentioned, he's never made a college start, and the way Kentucky's schedule works, he's going to have to be ready quick because they'll play Southern Miss week 1, and then it's South Carolina week 2 and Georgia week 3.
So receiver wise, if I was drafting like an Olympic team, I think I would go to Lexington pretty quick among college football receiver rooms. Barron Brown can really run. Key can also run and is pretty damn big. However, like on a yards per route run basis, which is probably the best proxy for like how good of a receiver are you actually.
Yeah.
Both guys were like very close to dead last in the SEC among starters last year. So it was like, good Lord, the lack of production relative to the measurables probably couldn't be wider.
Right.
If one of these guys breaks out, who is it and why?
Well, I think too, that's why they had to go get Jamori Macklin out of North Texas. I was trying to pull it up right here, but I think he was like 17.1 yards per catch last year at North Texas. So I think that's important too, to have that safety net in the slot who can do that. But that's a tough one. I think Dane Key he's not obviously doesn't have the same speed as Barron Brown. I just think he's a more polished receiver at this point in his career. He's got the size and he's got the strength that he kind of was lacking as a freshman. And I think he had a really kind of slow start last year. There were some drops, and then he got better and better as the season went on. He really did. And I think he was dealing with some stuff off the field too that probably slowed him down a little bit out of the gates. So he's a guy that I think is probably more NFL prototype right now, but Barron Brown is the more, I would say, has the higher ceiling just because of his speed. I mean, we see it in the kick return game. There's no better kick returner in college football than Barron Brown. And he can just beat guys with his speed. He did it in the bowl game. I think that was really big for both Key and Brown. Had, I think, 100-yard receiving games in that bowl game against Clemson. I think it was really important for those two guys to have a game to build momentum off going into next season. And Brown won on a deep ball for a 60-yard score. So, they're hoping that he can become better at the top of the route, just beating guys with his speed. There's definitely he showed flashes as a freshman, took a little bit of a step back last year. And I think, too, those numbers that you mentioned are partly on the quarterback. I mean, there were some missed throws last year where even early in that Georgia game, were they going to win that Georgia game? Probably not. But their first drive of the game, down 7-0, Tavion Robinson, who's not on the team anymore, and then I believe Barron Brown were pretty much wide open for pretty big games, and Leary just missed them. So I think hopefully they'll benefit from some better quarterback play this fall. But you're right. They definitely need to get some more explosive plays out of this offense.
So passing game should be better. Where else on this team, are you pretty confident will improve? Obviously, defensively, they bring back everybody. So I'm kind of curious, is there an aspect of the defense or a unit of the defense that maybe could take a big jump?
I think they're going to get more production just getting to the quarterback. And I think we started to see it at the end of last season. I know they had 8 sacks in the Clemson game combined. The Louisville game, it was at least 3 or 4. So obviously that, two of the better teams in the ACC. We didn't necessarily see it against the SEC offensive lines, but I just think they're bound to have some better years with the pass rush. I think Deion Walker's in that interior, 7.5 sacks as an interior defensive lineman is ridiculous. And they have a ton of depth in that front seven where, obviously teams are going to double Deion, but, guys like, I think JJ Weaver's a 6th-year guy who has been battling health issues. If they can finally keep him healthy, he's a guy who can go for 9 to 10 sacks easily. He's got that in him for sure. He's 25 years old. I mean, playing in college football, he probably should have that in him, as a guy who's been an all SEC guy before. And then elsewhere on the defensive line at edge, I think the coaching staff's really high on a guy in Trayvon Ripka, who just kind of had some injury issues last year that banged him up, but he started to come on late in the year. Tyrese Fairbury is another guy they're really high on in that edge room. And then even the last 2 years, they've gotten some sack production from their inside linebackers, especially Trevin Wallace, who's now in the NFL. They bring in Jamin Dumas-Johnson from Georgia, a guy who's obviously extremely talented, was an All-American in 2022. They bring back Derrick Jackson, who's gotten to the quarterback a couple times in his career. So they like to get creative with their pass rush. They really will use all of those guys in the front seven to get home, and I think they'll have some better numbers there this year.
What is a fall position battle that you're really looking forward to?
There's probably two. I'd say, first of all, the second cornerback spot is going to be huge. You have a guy who's a cornerback one in the SEC in Maxwell Harrison. You feel really good about him. And then it's going to be who's going to play outside across the field. You lose Andrew Phillips to the NFL draft. That's probably going to be between Jansen Dunn, who came in and played really well in the last 2 games of the year last year, but didn't play much throughout the regular season, transfer from Ohio State. I believe he's got 2 years left. And then they bring in DJ Waller from Michigan, who played 8 games as a true freshman last year, actually got some reps with the ones during spring ball at Michigan, but he's a Youngstown, Ohio guy. The starting job was a little unclear at Michigan. He comes here. So those two will battle it out outside. I would presume it's going to be Waller outside and then Dunn in the slot. I just think Dunn has the frame and just how he played in that position at the end of last year. I think they like him in the slot. So that's the biggest one for sure. They even have guys like J.Q. Hardaway from Cincinnati, a 6'3" guy with a lot of length that'll compete and be in that mix as well. And then probably on the offensive line at guard, I think Jagger Burton and Dylan Ray are going to have to compete for that left guard job. And that's going to be an important one because it's a much improved, on paper at least, offensive line with, for the first time in a couple of years now, probably 8 guys who could trust if there's an injury or two. You feel really good about your tackle play with Marcus Cox and Gerald Mincey coming in from Tennessee. And then you have a guy in Cortland Ford who can be your swing tackle, who started games at USC, started one at Kentucky last year in an injury situation and played really well. And then Eli Cox is 6th-year center. You feel really good about him. Jalen Farmer is going to play right guard. They feel great about him coming in from Florida. Said he was kind of the star of their spring camps on the offensive side of the ball, or at least one of them. So that left guard spot between Dylan Ray, who started 10 games last year, and then Jagger Burton, who was a high 4-star guy from Lexington, who just hasn't quite panned out yet, I think is going to be really important because I think there's a lot to like about this offensive line compared to the last 2 years.
Am I wrong to view this team as kind of having a bit of a 4-game season? I mean, I really expect 3-0 in the non-con plus Vandy.
Sure.
I have it as 0-4 against Georgia, at Texas, at Tennessee, at Ole Miss.
Me too. Yep.
And then, I mean, you're really like –
it's those 4 swing games.
It's those 4 swing games. South Carolina, at Florida, Auburn, and Louisville. So you get 3 out of 4
doubt.
in Kentucky, which is, very helpful.
Yeah.
Is there a guy who, like, currently we're not projecting a huge season for, but if he were to meet his – or, hit his potential a year earlier than expected – assuming it's not Vandergriff, because obviously, like, that's a pretty,
that's a basic answer.
People don't really watch summer school for Gershon to be like, hey, if the quarterback's really good.
Quarterback's good, yeah.
Is there a guy who can arrive a year early to maybe deliver like a 9-3 or an 8-4 type season for this team?
I don't know if it's a year earlier. Or I'm going to go with, it may be a boring answer, but I think it's really important just because he hasn't been a bowl guy, and that's the running back Chip Trayanum, right? He hasn't been a starter in his career yet. He's been a solid player at Ohio State and Arizona State, but he hasn't been that number 1 guy. So if they were trying hard to get a running back out of the portal after spring ball. It didn't happen. So, maybe there's some doubt. Maybe there's can he carry the load? And like I said earlier, Bush Hampton's had an 1,000-yard rusher every year he's been a coordinator. And then at Missouri, those last 3 games he called plays in 22, their running game with Cody Schrader and Brady Cook really took off. So if Chip Trayanum can come in and it's hard to ask him to be Ray Davis or a Benny Snell like that. I'm not Benny Snell, more Ray Davis, who came in and was an 1,000-yard rusher out of the portal. But if he can come in and be a steady number 1 back who's averaging, high 4 in the 5 yards per carry range, is able to get close to 1,000 yards, I think that would be massive because you're kind of a little bit worried about the running back room just because there's a lot of young guys behind him. They have Demi Sumo Karnbay as a senior, but he's more of a receiving back. He's not a guy who's going to be able to go get those tough nitty-gritty yards for you up the middle. And then you have redshirt freshman and true freshman, kind of the rest of the room. So if Chip Trayanum can come in and be the guy that can carry the load in that running back room. Because like we were saying, we feel pretty good about the passing game, the receiver room, the quarterback situation. If they can get what they need out of the run game, because, we think Kentucky, with their successful years, they're top 30 to top 20 to top 10 rushing offense in college football. The last 2 years, they finished in the 90s. That can't happen if Kentucky wants to win those swing games and maybe get to 9-3. So I think if Chip Trayanum can be a force out of that running back room, they can get there, because, like you said, they do have those 3 of those key swing games are right here in Lexington, including right off the bat week 2 in South Carolina. I think that's going to be the game that kind of either gives you great momentum going into the rest of the year or kind of takes the wins out of the sails. So, that's the biggest one for me.
Aaron, really appreciate it as always, man. I know we'll be following all your coverage on Cat's Paws, and we'll catch up soon.
Anytime.